This is Professor Don Bush from the Accounting Superstar channel. I've been a professor for about 30 years and a CPA for about that long, and I've got great ways to explain accounting. So you are at the right place here, folks. You've come to the right place. So today's lesson is about manufacturing documentation. Understanding how the documents flow in a manufacturing accounting system really helps you understand what's going on. So it's not hard. We'll get right through it here. And hang on here for a minute. So I'm going to scroll down the page down to work in process inventory. So by now, I hope that you understand that work in process inventory, that is the heart and soul of the accounting system. It is where everything comes together. In fact, you can see these arrows pointing towards work in process. And there's one right up here pointing down to work in process. Now, the heart of the accounting system for a manufacturing business, especially a job cost type of operation, is the job cost record or the job cost sheet. It goes by a couple different names. But this is the place where all the costs are accumulated. And so everything comes together here in work in process. And you'll have a job cost record for each and every job. So like, here's a guy working here on the right here. I don't know if you can see it. He's got a red shirt on. He's working on a boat. And since this boat is a custom built boat for a customer, it will have a job cost record. And so all the costs that that pertain to this boat will go on this job cost record, like labor and materials and overhead. So it all gets entered in here. And when the job is all finished, this job cost record will say, okay, job finished, and it'll give the date that it's finished. Now, back in the old days, these were paper-based, of course, but nowadays they're all on computer. And I would bet, it's been a long time since I've worked in a construction or a manufacturing type of operation. I've been a professor forever now. Back in the day, these job cost records were all paper, but now they're computerized. And I would imagine that in many ways the data is entered in automatically. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. But anyways, this job cost record, it's the heart. It's where it all comes together. And so you'll have a job cost record for each and every project that's going on. If you're building custom homes, you'll have a job cost record for each and every home. Now, even if you're working in an attorney's office, attorneys will have a job cost sheet for each case that they're working on. So it not only applies to manufacturing, but it also applies to things like auditing firms, accounting firms, probably to rock and roll bands that are doing records or going on tour and touring different cities and or different concerts. So these job cost records, they're pervasive. Pervasive is a big word. I know it means everywhere. They're everywhere. So here's how it all works out. So suppose the guy here, we'll call him Bob here, working on the boat here in the red shirt. He's saying, wow, I need some more raw materials here for this boat. I need to install the engine, or I need to install the navigation lights or whatever. So what he'll do he'll talk to the person who's in charge of the inventory up here. And we've got direct raw materials inventory. Now, he probably won't go over and actually talk to the person. I'm just using these terms loosely. He might type into a computer that he needs some materials. So it's probably that way now. Back in the ancient days when I worked in construction, you would actually talk to the person who's in charge of the inventory. So anyway, what would happen is Bob would fill out a material requisition form. And this just simply means I need materials. I need some teak wood. I've got a picture of teak wood here. I need a boat motor. I need a marine radio. And so he would write these things down and how many were taken out. And the person in charge of the inventory would have a copy of this. And also the accounting office would need to get a copy of this raw materials inventory requisition form, or just a materials requisition form to keep it short. So the accounting office, the people in charge of the inventory, and Bob would have a copy of this. And I know that sounds like a lot of copies, but they really are necessary. But nowadays with computers, the number of copies really isn't an issue. And I would bet that the minute that Bob fills out this materials requisition form and it's approved, that it would be automatically entered into the job cost record. So, because the job cost record is where it all comes together. Now, Bob needs to record his time working on this boat, all right, his labor. So I'm going to scoot over this way. And what we have over here is a daily timesheet. And I've got a construction worker up here, but let's say it's for Bob here working on the boat. So Bob would fill in this timesheet. He'd put his name and that kind of thing. And he'd say, hey, I worked on such and such boat for 5 hours today. And that's probably about all that Bob would enter in. He would not enter in his rate of pay, but a copy of this timesheet would make its way to the accounting office. And when the accounting office gets this daily timesheet, what they would do is they'd fill in the rest because they would know Bob's rate of pay and all that kind of thing. So they would fill in the rest and total it up. And the amount of cost for the labor for that day would get entered into the job cost sheet. You might say, wow, it seems like a lot of double, triple work here. Well, the job cost sheet is where all the costs come together. And the daily timesheets would support the job cost record here. And so if people are wondering, well, gosh, did Bob really work on this boat this much? Well, they could go back to the daily timesheets and check it out. And by the way, they could also do that with the materials too. They could double check. So these material requisition forms, they support what's on the job cost record. All right, and that's how you can verify and double check. And then also that's a way to find out if materials are missing. You know, what if they're not there? Or what if Bob's writing down time worked and it's not getting entered into the job cost record. So there's a lot of ways you can double check on how people are doing. So it's good to have all these documents, but they build on one another. Now, the last thing here is the manufacturing overhead. And this is probably the trickiest one for people to understand. I'm not going to go into detail about manufacturing overhead and how this predetermined overhead rate works. I'll save that for another video. But just know for now that we've got 3 different types of costs. We've got materials, and you know how that gets entered in now. And we've got direct labor, and you know how that gets entered in now. Well, we've got this predetermined overhead rate. Now, people on the factory floor, like Bob, they're not going to enter in this predetermined overhead rate. Usually it's the accountants that do this. And I know that students have a hard time understanding this, but it's really a pretty easy concept. I will say this much about it. Oftentimes it's based on the amount of labor that was involved to build the boat. That sometimes companies will set up a relationship between overhead and labor and just enter it in that way. But nevertheless, however companies do it, they need to add in some overhead because overhead is one of the 3 costs. So coming back over here, you probably can't see this on your computer screen, but here in this far right-hand set of columns here for the job cost record, they've got applied overhead. So this is where they would add the overhead. So on this job cost record, we've got columns here for materials and labor and overhead. Now, once the job is complete, once this boat is all finished and ready to go, well, it's no longer needed in work in process, but it's got to be moved on to finished goods. So what happens is who's ever in charge of filling this job cost record out, and it's probably the accountant, that they'll fill it out, they'll total things up, and they'll say, okay, date completed and the grand total cost that it took to for the labor, materials, and the overhead, so they've got a cost. And what'll happen is this job cost record will, in a sense, be transferred down to finished goods inventory. And when I say transfer down to, I use that term rather loosely, is that the information from the job cost record is taken out of work in process. So this job cost record is taken out of work in process because it's not in process anymore. And what'll happen is the amount of money and the information about the boat in this case will be entered into the finished goods inventory. All right, so it's entered in at the cost. And so here we have a lot of boats here in finished goods and a whole lot of boats over here in finished goods. And so they would have a record of all their inventory. And so these completed job cost sheets serve as a basis of this inventory. So everything is all connected together. It's just one big giant connected organism in a way. Now, when one of these boats is sold and a customer comes and picks it up, and we have cost of goods sold. And of course, the salesperson will write up a sales invoice. Now, the sales invoice is written at retail price. It's not written at cost because, most customers, they don't know how much it costs the company to build the product. Oftentimes, you don't want customers to know that. But it's listed at retail price. And the internal records here will have on here how much it cost to build it. So that way they can figure out the cost of goods sold. And that's why I have this cost of goods sold. It's based on the cost. So it's based on the inventory records here, which are based on the job cost records once the product is finished. So it's one big continuous thing. It's really cool how it works. So I'll make a future video on this predetermined overhead rate because that's the trickiest part. But just know that all the costs, all three costs, materials, labor, and overhead, are entered into this job cost record, and this is where everything comes together. So I hope this video helped you out, and if it did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Also, check out accountingsuperstars.com. I've got all my videos listed by topic, so you can find them. So until next time, over and out.